feared your life was in danger because you said you didn't expect any violence. And then there's another obvious question. If it's true that you didn't expect any violence, why did you use an elite naval blockade, an elite naval commando unit, the naval commandos? Why did you use an elite naval commando unit trained to kill? Why didn't you use a police unit? Why didn't you use the naval commandos? The most elite unit in the Israeli armed forces, the equivalent of the American Naval SEALs. The reasonable inference, if you judge Israel not by its words, but by its actions, the actions it took in preparation for the attack, namely its decision to use naval commandos, its decision to launch the commando raid in the dead of night, its decision to use percussion bombs, its decision to use tear gas, its decision to assault the Mavi Marmara, the only possible conclusion is that the death was intentional. On that scale, probably not, but that they intended to kill, as the Arab Knesset member, Ms. Zueidi, when she first said it, I was a little skeptical. She said they came to kill. But after looking through all the evidence, I think that's accurate. They came to kill. But that begs another question. Why? It wasn't sadism. No, there was a rationale. And it's important to think through what was the rationale. The first aspect of it is that Israel has, in the last few years, suffered a number, or had a number of bungled operations. There was the disaster, the military defeat in Lebanon. There was Gaza, which turned into a public relations disaster for Israel. And then there was the successful assassination of the Hamas member in Dubai, but that too was a bungled operation for many reasons. And now Israel was determined to have a successful operation. For those of you who are older in the room, you will remember that for quite a long time, Israel got a lot of mileage over what was called the raid on Entebbe. How many people here remember the raid on Entebbe? How many people have heard of it? Raise your hands. I know who I'm talking to. It was a Israeli commando raid which was launched in Uganda, where a hijacked Israeli plane was, and a lot of myth was spun out of that raid on Entebbe. And the Israelis were anxious to try to create another raid on Entebbe to compensate for this succession of bungled operations. One general was quoted as saying, "It's okay if the world thinks we're bananas, if they think we're crazy, but it's not okay if the world thinks we're incompetent and bananas." And Israel now wanted to restore its image, that raid on Entebbe image, which was aimed at restoring its deterrence capacity to show the Arabs that notwithstanding this succession of bungled operations, we still are what we once were. And it happens that the two people who made the decision to launch the attack in the Mavi Marmara, the two people were Ehud Barak and Netanyahu. And both of them, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Barak, they both have a history as commandos. In fact, Barak was Netanyahu's senior commando. There was a famous raid in 1972 in which they participated together. And then in the raid on Entebbe, it happens that the one person who died in the raid in Entebbe was Jonathan Netanyahu, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's brother. And so the idea of launching a commando raid in order to restore Israel's image was very much not just in the background, but in the forefront of their mind. The second reason they launched the attack was because of this character, Prime Minister Erdogan from Turkey. He was getting out of hand. He was another one of those Arabs who was just getting too uppity, and he needed to be cut down to size. Mr. Erdogan, as some of you might recall, when there was the World Economic Forum in January 2009, right after the massacre in Gaza, he said to the President of Israel before a large audience, "When it comes to killing, you know well how to kill." And that caused the whole diplomatic brouhaha. And then these Turks were getting really uppity because Turkey combined forces with Brazil, and they made a proposal to try to head off sanctions against Iran. And the Israelis were very upset because they want that attack on Iran. And so this Mr. Erdogan, he needs to be cut down to size. The Mavi Marmara was a Turkish flag vessel. About 80% of the passengers on the Mavi Marmara were Turkish citizens. And the third thing Israel needed to do, it had a real problem on its hands. The problem was these flotillas, these humanitarian vessels, they weren't stopping. There was one attempt, two attempts, three attempts. Okay, the first few attempts, Israel just averted its gaze and let the ships in. But then they wouldn't stop. So, when there was that fifth or sixth attempt, they rammed the boat. They thought that would stop it. But that didn't seem to work either. And with this gradual escalation in the number of flotillas and boats entering Gaza, defying Israel, and threatening the blockade, Israel decided to have to up the ante. And up the ante is what they always do. Why should anybody be surprised if Israel uses lethal force against nonviolent resistance? It does that every other week in Biliyeen. How does it deal with these nonviolent protesters who won't give up? Originally it tried to ignore them. Didn't work. Then it started firing tear gas. Didn't work. And then they killed people in those nonviolent protests. In fact, right the day after the flotilla massacre, they fired one of those tear gas canisters at the head of a young American woman, Emily Hill.